Of the lamest political spectacles I can recall occurred this afternoon at the request of two left-wing Democrats from California. Anna Eshoo and Jerry McNierney of California, who we will now refer to as the leaders of the Ministry of Truth, recently wrote a letter to cable companies in the hopes of silencing Newsmax, Fox News, and OAN. They claim the Capitol Hill riot was caused by these networks broadcasting allegations of voter fraud in the 2020 election. Eshoo and McNierney, of course, would love nothing more than conservative news to disappear. They salivate thinking of a country where only their ideas are possible. They gaze at China with an envy so deep it hurts. Sadly for them, as left as this country is becoming, it appears we're not quite ready for full-blown censorship and state-run media. The most ironic part of today was the fact that the Ministry of Truth started their hearing with what now appears likely to be a lie, repeating again the now very questionable story of Officer Brian Sicknick's death.
This led directly to the horrific events of January 6th, the attack on our Capitol and our democracy by insurrectionists motivated by former President Trump. 5 lives were lost that day, and more have been lost since. A Capitol police officer was murdered.
Capitol police officer murdered. Last night, we reported Officer Sicknick's own mother says she believes her son died of a stroke. She said he was not hit in the head. Do you think the Democrats care about that? Of course not. Congressman Steve Scalise, who was shot and nearly killed by a left-wing gunman, picked apart calls for censorship about 5 minutes into the meeting.
A day that a gunman walked onto a baseball field and shot at over a dozen members of Congress, including myself. There's been a lot of investigation into it. The FBI did a report. The gunman was motivated by hypercharged rhetoric that he was hearing from the left, from high prominent elected officials, as well as media personalities. I don't blame those other people. I blame the shooter.
Common sense. Let it wash over you. Conservatives also pointed out the obvious. If we are canceling Newsmax and Fox, we need to cancel CNN and MSNBC for years of dangerous lies, alleging Donald Trump was a Russian agent. Years of lies. How many times did they talk about that story? Every day for 2 years? About the President of the United States. Talk about dangerous. So now, at this point, we're all canceled, right? Now we have no cable news. The newspapers would love that, and maybe that's why they've been so quiet. The New York Times, the Washington Post were once fierce defenders of the First Amendment. Not today. And now think about this. Can you imagine if this hearing was led by Republicans? Imagine if today started with a letter from Jim Jordan and Devin Nunes requesting cable companies cancel CNN and MSNBC over their allegations that Donald Trump was a Russian asset and all of that reporting. Imagine they wrote the letter right after the Mueller report came out. Can you imagine the outrage? It would be insanity in this country right now. But today, no outrage from the mainstream press. Nothing. In fact, if you Google today's hearing, and you should, you'll notice nobody even covered this thing. It's unbelievable. Evidently, the left no longer cares about freedom of speech and freedom of the press. They'll happily trade that for an unbreakable leftist society where conservatives' thought is suppressed and destroyed. Fair-minded journalists no longer run these mainstream media institutions. Left-wing activists are running the show now. This is all part of the plan. They've put these people in these places. It's working really well. Whatever journalists are left are afraid of them. We've seen that at the New York Times. The people that have worked there for decades have no idea what's happening to that newspaper. It's really scary. As far as freedom of speech, Georgetown law professor Jonathan Turley put it best today.
Those seeking limits often speak of free speech like it's a swimming pool that must be monitored and carefully controlled for purity and safety. I view it more as a rolling ocean. It is indeed dangerous, but it's also majestic and inspiring. Its immense size allows for a natural balance. Free speech allows false ideas to be challenged in the open rather than driving dissenting viewpoints beneath the surface.
There was a lot of great speeches like that today. The cure for bad speech is more speech, not less speech. We shouldn't be canceling anything. We should be putting more out there. That's why this country works. Common sense, again, prevails. Republican Kathy McMorris Rodgers, the committee's ranking member, delivered one of the best blows against the Ministry of Truth. Take a listen.
Elected officials using their platform to pressure private companies to censor media outlets they disagree with? That sounds like actions from the Chinese Communist Party, not duly elected representatives of the United States Congress.
It's very true. Very well put. And to Democrats Anna Eshoo and Jerry McNierney, you should be utterly embarrassed by writing that letter. All right, House Republicans aren't taking this lying down. 13 members of the Energy and Commerce Committee sent a letter today to the acting chairwoman of the FCC, urging her to defend the First Amendment, saying in part, House Democrats' recent actions directly contradict their prior stance on the importance of protecting broadcasters and opposing government-sanctioned censorship. One of those who signed this bill, one of the 13, is Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio. And, sir, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks a lot. Good to be with you.
All right, so a huge story for us here at Newsmax, obviously. Democrats are trying to destroy our business, destroy our livelihood, and ruin the press in this country. Why did you feel it was so important to sign on to this?
Well, because of exactly what Kathy McMorris Rogers said. Yep. Because what our Democrat colleagues are doing by trying to pressure private companies into taking Newsmax and Fox News and OAN off of their networks, that's eerily similar to what the Chinese did just 2 weeks ago when they took BBC off of their networks because it didn't meet their criteria for telling the truth. Look, the American people are tired of fake news. They don't trust fake news. They want free and open speech. You said it, Rob. The idea behind freedom of speech is more speech, not less speech.
Absolutely. I mean, you talked about the story from the BBC in China. I want to go to that for a second. You brought it up in today's hearing. China recently, just for everyone at home, banned the BBC from broadcasting in China for, quote, violating requirements that news should be truthful and fair. Sound familiar? Sounds very familiar, right? The BBC had reported on China's treatment of the Uyghur Muslims and the horrible things that they're doing to the Uyghurs. They got banned for that. And so I just want to ask you, imagine what stories Democrats might find unfair if they controlled our media.
Well, I don't know about you, Rob, but I'm not interested in the Democrats being the arbiters of truth. No. That's why we have the First Amendment. That's why we have a free and open press to act as the referee and to call a foul when they see the truth being manipulated. We don't need Democrats or liberals having the corner market on defining what is true and what is not true.
Sure.
And that's what is so egregious about what my colleagues did by sending that letter. Because, I mean, this is what an authoritarian government like the Chinese Communist Party does. It's not what the United States legislature does.
Absolutely. And again, I want to reiterate for our viewers, as you did in the hearing today, Congressman, Newsmax never condoned any of the rioting that took place at the Capitol, not one bit. Take a listen.
Images that I've seen this afternoon at the Capitol, frankly, disgust me. Violence has no place in our society. Destruction of public property has no place. Disrespecting law enforcement is not acceptable. This is un-American. This is not what we do. We are better than this, and we must denounce this.
We condemn the violence. We condemn it, all right? The people who did illegal things must be arrested.
A small fraction of Wednesday's massive D.C. crowd took it way too far, and we at Newsmax condemned that. We condemned this immediately. I condemned it on the air while we were covering the breaking news. And so I want to point out, that's unlike the mainstream press and the way they handled a lot of the left-wing riots and protests and a lot of the damage we saw last summer.
Yeah, I said the same thing, Rob. I said anybody that attacks our Capitol and attacks Capitol Police and tries to hurt and harm and potentially kill members of Congress, they ought to be put in prison. Just like people that attack a federal courthouse in Portland or Seattle or a police station or shoot law enforcement officers. Remember what the mainstream media called the protests and the riots that killed people and destroyed businesses and facilities throughout last year.
Sure.
They called them mostly peaceful protests. They didn't take this same view.
Yeah. Absolutely. Two Democrats who are calling for us to be canceled, both of them that wrote the letter are both from Silicon Valley. And I want to ask you this. It makes it kind of funny when you think about the fact that they're not calling for similar scrutiny from their pals in big tech. And I just find, they're right there in Silicon Valley. You wonder what kind of connections there are between these big tech companies. A lot of people mad at Facebook after what happened. They're not calling them out. They're just calling out us.
Well, it goes to the double standard.
Yeah.
They have one standard for liberal Democrats and another standard for conservatives, especially conservative Republicans. And that's what makes this so egregious.
Yeah.
They want to control what speech is authorized, what speech is true, what speech is allowed. That's not the way the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States works.
A recent Suffolk USA Today poll shows that among the most trusted news sources for Trump voters, Republicans, Fox came in at 34%, Newsmax at 17%. And then you can see on the way down there. It won't happen. But imagine conservative media was actually canceled. Imagine that McNerney and Issue got their way. What do you think this country looks like with just a one-sided press?
I can't even imagine. We've seen so much of that. We saw 3.5 years of attacks on Donald Trump, even before he came into office. And we saw the lies, the Russian collusion hoax, the false impeachment, the first one and the second one, trying to just distract and distract and distract from the fact that they do not have a plan to improve the quality of life for the American people.
Yep.
And that's what makes this so bad. We're sent here to work on behalf of the American people. That's what the American people think that we're supposed to be doing. We're not supposed to be trying to control the speech that they can hear and not hear.
Absolutely. Well said, Congressman. Bill Johnson of the state of Ohio. Sir, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you.
Hi, Emma Reckenberg here. If you like this video, there's a whole lot more to see on Newsmax TV. You can watch for free right here on our YouTube live stream and be the first one here each time our experts break down real news. Just hit that subscribe button, ring the bell icon, and stay with us on America's fastest growing cable news channel, Newsmax TV.